All right, everyone. Thank you for being a part of the webinar. We're going to get started. Today we're going to be talking about consumer protection, especially when it comes to the winter season and how to protect yourself, your family, your community, your clients, anyone else. My name is Bengani Jiranyama. I'm a program manager within the Attorney General's office. I'm joined by my colleague who's going to introduce himself.
Good morning, Tim Deppen with the Community Engagement Division.
Yep, he's our fellow program manager. We also have our program assistant, Jaime Gomez-Diaz. He is sitting by a desk waiting for any technical questions that you might have. If you cannot see the presentation, if you can't hear the presentation, he's there to help out. You can reach out to him at 617-963-2541. Once again, that's 617-963-2541. He'll be able to help you out. If you can't see the presentation, we do recommend you using Chrome or Firefox. Internet Explorer, for whatever reason, can be finicky. And if you can't hear the presentation, we do recommend that you log in through the teleconferencing. We sent you instructions on how to do that, but you can also reach out to Jaime. He'll walk you through that process as well. Sometimes you can hear over the computer, sometimes you can't, but you can always hear over the phone. If you haven't done so yet, you can also change your name. At the top of the screen, there should be a little emoticon or emoji person, and that brings you your participants list. The first participant should be you. That could be viewer 1, viewer 8, viewer 15, whatever that you have. You can right-click on that. You can change it to your first and last name, or you can change it to your organization, whatever you feel comfortable with. It just helps us take count of who has signed on and who is a part of the webinar. One more thing, today's webinar will be recorded. We'll send out a link to the YouTube video of this presentation sometime in the next couple of weeks, but today we'll be sending out a PDF copy of the presentation as well as a survey. If you don't mind taking that survey, it's about 1 to 2 minutes and really does help us out a lot. I think that's it for the beginning part, so we're going to get into this presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can use the chat function, and you can send out a chat to us. We'll be more than willing to do the best to answer the question to the best of our abilities, of course. So thank you again for being a part of it. Before we get into the how to protect yourself in the winter season, we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the Attorney General's office. If you've been a part of our webinar series beforehand, you've probably seen it. We'll try to make it go by a little bit quicker. Today we're going to be talking talking from the Attorney General's office, and what you see on the screen right there, that's our boss. That's the Attorney General of Massachusetts, Maura Healey. She's the Chief Lawyer and Law Enforcement Officer of the Commonwealth, and she's our boss, and she actually, when she was running for Attorney General, she went out to every single community in the Commonwealth, and she spoke about her vision for Massachusetts. A lot of people agreed with what she was saying, but they said, I don't really understand what the Attorney General's office is, or how it can really help me out, help out my family, and help out my community. So she actually created our team, the Community Engagement Team, to go out and bring the resources of our office outside of Boston and our regional offices in downtown New Bedford, downtown Worcester, downtown Springfield, but bring it to every single municipality and region in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And that can include programs like we're doing today. It can be a presentation on things like workers' rights or consumer rights or civil rights, or landlord-tenant issues or identity theft and scams. It can be our programs that we run, like our debt collection clinics, where we try to help out consumers that might have debts and try to figure out a way to come to an amicable solution on that, or our wage theft clinic where we help out workers as well. And how the Attorney General's office is organized, we've got 6 different bureaus in the office. We come from the executive team, which also houses our communications team, our policy and government team, and a lot of other teams within our office. We have 5 other bureaus. We have a criminal bureau that's kind of your bread and butter criminal justice and law enforcement type of stuff. We have a healthcare and fair competition bureau, which houses things such as our healthcare division that looks into healthcare issues in Massachusetts. We have our energy and environment team. We're going to talk a little bit about energy and environment today. The Attorney General is the ratepayers advocate in Massachusetts, so we have a lot of different ways that we try to help out residents in Massachusetts. We also have a government team that looks into things like the open meeting law and making sure that local, regional, and county governments are open and accessible to everyone that lives in Massachusetts. We also have our Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the slide, but that's our most public-facing bureau. If you contact our office, most likely you will immediately get directed to our Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Who the Attorney General serves and how. We serve 3 different tiers of people, right? As long as you live in Massachusetts, we serve you in your public interest. It doesn't matter what your gender is, what your age is, what your national origin, immigration status, or any other thing. As long as you live in Massachusetts, our office is here to serve you and to help you out. We also serve groups of consumers. That can be an issue where we see that a organization is not paying their workers fair wages or providing workplace rights to their workers, and we go and investigate it, and we try to find a solution to that. It can be looking at civil rights issues throughout the Commonwealth. It can also be looking at energy problems that we're going to be talking about later. We serve groups of consumers. We also get a lot of people asking us, can you serve me in my individual court action? Well, actually, we don't serve individual court actions. One reason is because we do have a constitutional duty to provide legal services to State Departments, officers, and commissions. So if you have any legal actions against that, we have an administrative law division, which is mandated by the Massachusetts Constitution for our office to have to serve that. We also we have about 500 staff throughout Massachusetts, but we don't have enough to serve everyone in their legal actions, but we do have administrative ways that we can help out. That can either be through consumer mediation or anything in between that. We've got people that help out. How do we do that? I kind of look at it as 2 different tiers. The 2 tiers you see, the first on the top, investigation and enforcement. That's kind of your traditional law enforcement type of way. We look at bad actors, and then we try to make sure that people aren't compensated or people are actually getting their fair wages, or that if they bought something that they get their fair compensation if it's faulty. We look into bad actors and we try to stop their bad actions. But I also look at it as through preventative resources, like what we're doing today, where we try to go out and train people, community, organizations, businesses about what their rights are under the law, but also what their responsibilities are. We also receive a lot of different complaints, a lot of different comments from people throughout the state. We use all of that to actually help inform us on our policy agenda. Our office has a policy and government team. We can advocate for policy changes on the state level, but also on the national level, and we use all the interactions that we have with people to inform us on what policies to advocate for. And where we're located, like I said earlier, we've got 2 locations in downtown Boston near the State House. We also have locations in downtown New Bedford, downtown Worcester, and downtown Springfield, but we're trying to be everywhere. If you have an organization, a business, a community group, whatever you have, we can be there. We can be in Great Barrington, we can be in Lowell or Lawrence, we can be down in Fall River or Hyannis, wherever you have issues. We would be more than willing to come out and bring our office to your community. Again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can use the chat function. We can answer it to the best of our ability, and that's the best way that we can help out with that. And as promised, our Public Protection and Advocacy Bureau helps out with a lot of different things. It helps out with protecting students against predatory for-profit schools, ensuring that workers are getting paid, combating discrimination, and fighting for consumers against scams and other deceptive business practices. They house things like our Civil Investigation Division, our Consumer Protection Division, our Fair Labor Division, our Insurance and Financial Services Division, as well as our Civil Rights Division, and our Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, which is our probably most public-facing division. If you call our office, you're probably getting someone from our Consumer Advocacy and Response division that we like to call CARB. Now I'm going to actually pass over the mic to my colleague Tim Deppen, who is going to take the reins and is going to be speaking about how to protect yourself in the winter today. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Use the chat function if you have any questions.
Thanks, Magani. Again, my name is Tim Deppen. I'm in the Community Engagement Division here as well. Thanks so much for joining us for our presentation on winter rights, which of course is on the warmest day of the winter that we've had so far, but I do appreciate, and we all here at the office appreciate being a part of this webinar today when we know you could be out there watching the Patriots parade. So to begin with, we just have a general overview. This is a publication sent out by our office about some general things that we'll be talking about here today. We'll include this when we send out the copy of the slide and everything at the end of the presentation. So if you see something here that I don't touch on and you have a question you'd like answered, please use the chat function, as Magani said. But with that, we'll get moving on to the meat of the presentation. So to begin with, we just have some points about tenant rights and landlord responsibilities, specifically when it comes to things like cold weather and snow. So to begin with, we'll start with the second point here, that payment for heating fuel can be either the landlord or the tenant's responsibility, but that's going to depend on a couple of things. The first is that it has to be spelled out in the lease, right? It has to be in the lease that is what is going to be the case. So if the landlord is expecting the tenant to pay this, they're going to have to put that out in the lease. The second thing is that it has to be metered separately, just to the tenant's apartment, right? Much like with electricity, it's also true with the heating source, that the tenant's not going to be responsible for heating common areas of an apartment building, say. And if the landlord it's not metered so that the tenant can only pay for their area, then it can't be the tenant's responsibility. So we go back up to this first point here, and that's that during the heating season, which is really most of the year, that's the middle of September through the middle of June, the landlord has to keep the apartment at a certain range of temperatures. Between 7 a.m. to 11 p.m., waking hours while you're up, that's between 68 and 78 degrees. The apartment has to be at, or house or wherever you're renting has to be at least 68 degrees there. That can go down to 64 degrees in the overnight hours between 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. But again, that's still a pretty strict range there. And the other important thing to remember, and it's this last point that we have here, is that the tenant is not responsible for heating any common areas, like I said, but also that the landlord is the one who is responsible for the function of the heating system. So it is, yes, possible that the tenant could be billed. It has to pay for the heating fuel to heat the apartment, but the landlord is responsible for the function of that system. So should something go wrong with a radiator, should something go wrong with other parts of the heating system, it's the landlord's responsibility to fix that. It's not going to be the tenant's responsibility to pay for that fix. With that being said, what's your recourse if something like that is going on? Your apartment, the house you're renting, is not being kept to the temperatures that it's supposed to be according to these rules and regulations. The first thing really should be to contact your landlord, right? Especially if it's a property the landlord doesn't live at themselves. They just won't know, right? They just may not know that a radiator broke and the apartment has gotten very cold. And so your first call probably should be to your landlord to inform them of that. If it's a common problem or the landlord is not responsive, the next thing you can do is contact the Department of Public Health or the Inspectional Services Department in your city or town. They can come out and do an inspection, and they can potentially cite the landlord for failure to keep the apartment at those temperatures, because that regulation is part of the state's sanitary code, which is enforced at the local level by departments of public health or inspectional services departments. The other thing we have here is that the landlord is responsible for snow removal from any entryway that's used by multiple tenants. So if there's one door to a triple decker that everybody in the house has to use, it's going to be the landlord's responsibility to make sure that that is something you can get through. You can get through that door, that is passable. The other thing you might want to be aware of, or just so you know, is that snow removal requirements are also going to vary by city or town, right? How soon after a snowstorm does the sidewalk have to be clear? How wide a path do you have to have on the sidewalk? So you can check in with your local city or town hall to see what those regulations may be where you live.
Once again, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can use the chat function. We'll be more than happy to try to answer it to the best of our abilities.
So while we're speaking about heat, we'll talk about where that heating source comes from. There are many different heating sources, but one way that we can break this up is to think of it as from regulated utilities and from unregulated sources. So regulated utilities, that's if you get your heating source from either natural gas or electricity. And from what I could find on the state's website, about 50% of Massachusetts consumers get their heating source from natural gas. About 15% get it from electricity. So about 65% get it from a regulated utility. Although that, of course, that varies widely across the state, right? You can't get your heating source from natural gas where there's not the infrastructure for that, and so that's going to vary from parts of the state. But electric and gas, they're regulated industries, and we'll talk about on the next slide. They have a moratorium on shutoffs when it comes to heating sources in the winter. It's called the Winter Moratorium. Also regulations on pricing. So if you get your heating source from that, there are different avenues available for you than if you should get your heating source from an unregulated utility, an unregulated source of heating. For most people, that's going to be heating oil, right? About 28% or so of the state uses heating oil. The rest of the 7% is made up with different sources, including things like wood and even coal that some folks use to heat their houses. The important thing to remember about this is that if you run out during the heating season, an emergency refill where you need oil right away to keep your house being heated, that can be very expensive, and there could be a period of time where you have to go without heat. So if you do have that unregulated source of heating for your home, you're just, as you know, and you just want to make people aware, you're going to want to stay on top of that to make sure that it doesn't come where you need a refill immediately on that. So as I mentioned, the Winter Moratorium prevents electric and gas customers from having their heating fuel shut off between November 15th and March 15th. So again, the key thing there is it's the source of heating. So if you have gas heat, right, that doesn't mean that your electricity could not be shut off during that period, because your electricity is not your source of heat. The gas is. They could not shut that off from you. While the company can't shut you off, it's also important to remember that your debt will continue to accrue. So you really should make every effort to pay your heating bill, right? Just because they can't shut you off doesn't mean that you're not going to have a very big bill at the end of this period, and at the end of the period, they could shut you off, right, once they get outside the Winter Moratorium. The Winter Moratorium does not apply to debt that's going to be accrued before November 15th. The other thing to remember or to know is that the moratorium can be extended past March 15th. That's done by the governor's office. I think that depends on the severity of the winter, how cold it is. I think, unfortunately, our past couple winters, we've seen cold weather extend well beyond March and into April, and there has been a corresponding extension of the Winter Moratorium. Other thing to be aware of, the Attorney General's office as well as the Department of Public Utilities can help you in working out a payment plan with your electric or gas provider. The other thing I'll say is your utility company, your electric company, your gas company, they have a number of avenues for you to try to pay off an arrearage, right? They have an arrearage management plan. They have budget billing where if, let's say, your electricity bill is much higher in the summer, you can't afford it then, but you can afford it in the winter. You can't deal with that variation. They can try to find out your total usage for the year, break that into 12, have you pay the same amount every month so you can have a better sense of that. There are also low income rates that you can pay with your utility provider, but to get any of those things, you do have to contact them and to talk about your options. And again, I think it's important to do stuff like that if you're having trouble paying your bills, even during the winter moratorium, because it's not a problem that's just going to go away come April, right? It's going to have to be managed with at some point. So to the extent you can pay some, to the extent you can contact either our office or your utility provider directly to get some help with this situation, I think can be helpful to you and save you in the future. Some other things to be aware of with fuel assistance. LIHEAP is the major fuel assistance. Consumers who make up to 60% of the state's median income are eligible for fuel assistance. LIHEAP will pay a fixed amount to assist with your winter heating bills, and that's going to be determined on things like your income and your household size. Local agencies are the ones who actually determine the eligibility, so CAP programs, consumer assistance programs in your area, are the ones who end up making that determination on assistance. For more information, I would contact either the Executive Office of Housing or the Department of Housing and Community Development. They would have more information. You can find all of the exact income thresholds and things like that on their website. Important thing to remember with LIHEAP is they will make a payment to the primary heating provider, even if that's an unregulated utility, right? Even if you're part of the 0.5% of the population that heats your house with coal, LIHEAP can assist and provide a certain amount of money to help with that heating. And then we have the number down here. If you're seeking assistance, you can contact the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development. They have a cold relief hotline. That number is right there. As Bangani's mentioned a couple times, as I've mentioned, we'll get this out as this presentation out as a PDF to everyone, so you will have that phone number there, but just to let you know. Other things to be aware of, some other consumer protections. Your source of heating, we mentioned this during the winter moratorium, can't be shut off between November 15th and March 15th with the possibility of an extension there. If all residents of your home are over 65, your electricity or gas cannot be shut off without prior authorization from the Department of Public Utilities. So if you do get a shut off and that applies to you, you may want to contact the Department of Public Utilities to see what the case is there. There are also other scenarios where your electricity or gas cannot be shut off without authorization from DPU, the Department of Public Utilities. If you're having a financial hardship and one of these following applies to you, you or someone in your home is seriously ill, you have an infant, you have a child under a year, under 12 months of age in the home, and all adults in the home are 65 and a minor child resides in the home. So that's basically like the first one that we mentioned there, right, if everyone's over 65, but the only person who isn't is a minor child, then you would also need that authorization from the Department of Public Utilities. So if you are shut off and this seems like something that should have applied to you, you may want to contact the Department of Public Utilities. You can, of course, also contact the Attorney General's office, and we can reach out to them on your behalf. So we're going to switch topics a little bit here, though I think it is very much related to talk about competitive electric suppliers. So this is an area of concern for our office. We last year released a report from a 2-year study that we had done on competitive electric suppliers, and we'll talk about some of our findings there. But it's an area that our office has been looking at closely. And I think specifically, it's important to put in this presentation because this time of the year is when we're most likely to hear from competitive electric suppliers, and we'll get into the reason why that is. But this time of the year is when competitive electric suppliers are likely going to be trying to switch the most people over to their services. So it's important they're aware of what they are, what they aren't, and what to be aware of as a consumer. So to begin with, a competitive electric supplier is not your utility company, right? They're not Eversource, they're not National Grid, they're not Unitil. Though sometimes when they come to your door, we have heard reports that they say they work with your utility. And I guess at a very, very base level that's true, because what a competitive electric supplier does is they become your supplier of electricity. It makes sense given their name. They are a company that purchases electricity wholesale and sells it to retail as well as business customers. They do not deliver the electricity to your house. That is still done by your utility. that is still done by Eversource, that's still done by National Grid, right? So when I say that at a base level, it might be true that they work with those companies. Yes, they supply the electricity, but your utility is still the one who's delivering it to your house. If you switch to a competitive supplier, or you are switched to a competitive electric supplier, you'd see it reflected as a line item on your electricity bill. When you go to pay your electricity bill, it'll still look like it's coming from your utility provider, but you will see as one of the items on that bill that this new company is providing your electricity. They are the supplier of your electricity. So on this next slide, I'm going to go by it pretty briefly, but again, we will send this out to everybody. This is a one-page document that our office came up with for some tips on competitive electric suppliers, some of the things that we saw when we studied competitive electric suppliers, and you're giving yourself a little spoiler to the rest of the presentation here by taking a look at it, but suffice to say, not many people save money when they switch to a competitive electric supplier, and there are some reasons for that we'll get into on the next couple slides. Again, any questions at any point, please feel free to use the chat button. So some things to be aware of with competitive electric suppliers. The first thing is you want to be aware of impersonators. Again, I sort of already alluded to this. When someone comes to your door, they may say that they work with Eversource or National Grid or Unitil or whoever your utility in the area is. The important thing to remember is that your utility is never going to go door to door, ask to see your bill or account, or try to get you to sign up for services. You're already signed up with them because by the function of them delivering the electricity to your house. You are signed up with them. You have an account with them. So they do not need to go and sign you up for something else. The other important thing to remember, and this will inform a lot of what we're talking about past this point, is that your utility company is not allowed to make a profit on the supply of your electricity. They buy the electricity, and they do this twice a year. So every 6 months, there's a change in the price of electricity from your utility company. They buy it at a certain amount. A kilowatt hour is how you determine the price of electricity, or one way you can determine the price of electricity. They buy it at a certain amount per kilowatt hour, and they sell it to you at that same amount. They're not allowed to make a profit on that. So they have nothing different to sell you. They don't have anything to sell you, so they're not going to come to your door or waste time and waste money paying people to come to your door to try to sell you on something when they can't change the price that they're charging. So if somebody comes to your door and says they work with Eversource or National Grid, unless they're coming to do a repair or something like that, I think you want to be very wary of who this person actually works for.
And Tim, I'll also add that a lot of these competitive electric supply companies are hiring a lot of young people who are working on commission, and they're telling them you've got to do anything that you can do to get a sale, right? If you don't get a sale, you're not getting paid. So although these might be legitimate businesses, they're practicing deceptive business practices, and they're trying to do anything that they can do to get a sale. So they will do things like impersonate and try to tell you that your electric rates will go down, but in actuality, again, like Tim said, the basic service rate changes every 6 months, right? And electric supply companies that are regulated cannot change that service rate. They're at the level of what that service rate is.
Yeah, thanks, Pagani. Other things to be aware of: protect your utility account number as if it were your credit card or your Social Security number, right? I think we all know if I came up to your door tomorrow and I asked to see your credit card number or your Social Security number, if you could give that to me, you would never do that. We all know that would lead you to be the victim of identity theft, most likely. It's not something you'd want to do. I don't know that we all feel the same way about our utility account number. I don't know that we all view it the same way, but we really should, because unfortunately what we hear about in some instances is when you show your bill to these competitive electric supply salespeople, or you give them your utility account number, they take that as authorization to switch you over to their services. So they become your supplier with that information. It's a technique called slamming. And should that happen to you, that's absolutely something you should report to our office and potentially the Department of Public Utilities. But again, the best way to avoid the hassle is by not giving it to them and realizing that is personal information to you, and you should treat it as if it were a credit card number or a bank account number, even if intuitively it doesn't seem as important as those two things. And we've sort of already talked about this one a little bit. Know how to evaluate your electric rate. Your basic service rate, as I mentioned, it changes every 6 months, and it's usually higher in the winter and lower in the summer. And that's why I think this was an important part to include in this presentation. Because it's usually higher in the winter, these competitive electric suppliers come around more in the winter, right, when you might be a little bit more frustrated with the rate you're paying for electricity, and when they can offer you what seems like a lower rate, right? They can offer you less per kilowatt hour in February, let's say, than you're currently paying. But what they don't tell you is that your rate will likely go down in May, right? This is, for example, this is National Grid. National Grid would change in May. Other utilities change at slightly different times of the year. They can come around in February. Let's say, I think everybody right now is paying around 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour. They can offer you a rate at 12.5 cents, 12.75 cents per kilowatt hour, right? It looks like you're going to be saving money, and you do save money for a first couple of months. But what they don't tell you is your rate is likely to go down in May. It will probably go down below the figure that they have, and that's why when we study this, as you saw in one of those slides, and these numbers have actually been updated a little bit, in the 3 years we've been looking at this, consumers in Massachusetts have lost cumulatively almost $250 million. And they didn't lose that money because they wanted to help out this company and they knew they'd be paying more for electricity, right? Most people went in with an understanding that they were going to save money by switching to these competitive electric suppliers. And this not understanding or deceptively marketing around your electric rate is one of the main reasons why these folks have lost money with competitive electric suppliers. Some tips about the contract, and we talked about some of these things on the last slide, but we'll just reiterate a little bit. Some things you should ask: how long is the contract? Right. For example, when somebody comes around in February and they're promising you this new electric rate, and the contract's going to be a 9-month term, well, that will perfectly take you back to the winter season when your rate's likely to go up again, right? They'll be on the competitive electric supplier's contract for the whole time that your rate may have been lower in the summer. Sometimes these contracts are even longer, right? Sometimes these contracts are multiple years where you're paying a certain rate that it turns out is not a good rate later on down the line in the contract. And this goes sort of to the third point that we have here. Is there a cancellation fee? Some of these contracts have cancellation fees that are quite high. And the earlier in the contract you cancel, the more it may cost you. So to understand if you are signing up with one of these competitive electric suppliers and you find out that you're not getting as good a rate as you could be back with your utility company on that fixed basic rate service, will it cost you money to cancel? Does the contract auto-renew? And when it auto-renews, are you being charged the same rate, or will it be at a different rate? Right? Let's say you're a particularly savvy consumer who knows that your rate will likely go down in the summer. You think you're signing up with a competitive electric supplier only through till June or July, and you'll switch back at the end of the contract, but the contract has an auto-renewal clause. And when the contract auto-renews, not only are you stuck in a contract for a summer period of time now, but your rate is also changed to a variable rate. So rather than paying that fixed amount that you agreed to, your monthly rate is now going to change every month, and it makes it harder to plan. So just to be careful for situations like that with auto renewals and variable rates. And finally, the last point we have here, it's actually the second to last point on our list. Are you saving money over the course of the contract? That's the real question. That's the crux of it. Are you saving money over the course of the contract? They can try to market you that you'll be saving money next month or this month or for a couple months, but over the course of the whole contract, are you likely to save money, right? And based on our study, what our office and our Energy and Telecommunications Division found, the answer to that is likely no. Most people are not saving money, and the people who are saving money are really, really on top of things. So to the extent that you're not going to be spending hours on, or don't have the ability to spend hours thinking about your electric supply every month, it can be difficult to save money with a competitive electric supplier. And so the safest course of action may be to stay with your utility company, even if in the moment a salesman makes it seem like you're going to lose money by doing that. The other thing to remember here is you have 3 days to cancel a contract with a competitive electric supplier. That's true of any door-to-door sale in Massachusetts for the most part. So you have that 3-day right to cancel. Should you have someone at your door, they're really selling you on it, and then you change your mind, you really start thinking about it, you really start looking at the contract and evaluating the contract, and you decide you're not going to save money, you have a 3-day right to cancel. You shouldn't feel guilty about you exercising that right. That's your right as a consumer in Massachusetts. And how you cancel the contract is usually contained within the contract. So one section of the contract should be how to cancel, what you have to do. You have to send a certified letter or whatever it may be. So make sure that is included in there to know you have that 3-day right to cancel in this case.
Again, everyone, if you want to ask a question, you can use the chat function, and we can answer to the best of our ability. Right now, I'm not seeing any questions, so if we do have a question, we'd be more than willing to try to answer it.
So lastly, that's a brief overview on competitive electric suppliers. Again, if the guys had any questions, we're happy to answer to the best of our ability. Just want to touch briefly on door-to-door snow removal. It thankfully really has not been a problem so far this winter for us, but we will, I guess, see what the rest of February has to bring. In general, if a business is selling services door-to-door, they're supposed to notify city or town hall or the local police department they are going around soliciting business door-to-door. Now, when I say that, do I expect a kid in the neighborhood who's trying to make a couple bucks by shoveling sidewalks or driveways to have done that? Probably not, and whether he should have is a slightly different question. But to the extent that a company is coming to your door, someone who wants you to sign a contract that every time it snows they're going to come and they plow your driveway, they really should be informing city or town hall before they do something like that. And if they didn't, that may be a red flag. What else may they not do over the course of the contract? You may want to ask for an estimate before you agree to any work. With anything, you have the right to an estimate. You may want to ask for a contract, or you have the right to a written contract before agreeing to any work. Again, it may not seem in the moment like this is something that necessarily requires a full contract. The fact that you're going to pay someone $20, $30 to come and plow your driveway every time it snows, but the first time that they don't come, or the first time that they ask for $40 to plow your driveway, you may wish that you had that written contract that contained your agreement. So it does have to be disputed. You have that written evidence. We talked about this with the competitive electric suppliers, but door-to-door sales, they fall under the 3-day right to cancel. Again, you shouldn't feel guilty about canceling that. You should know that that's your right, and you can cancel that contract if they get you to agree to something that you don't want to agree to. Again, despite high-pressure sales tactics, you're not obligated to hire a contractor who has come to your door, right? They're trying to sell you on something. I think, if we go to an auto dealership, right, the stereotype is that we expect someone to give us high-pressure sales tactics. We may not feel bad about saying no to them, right, but when someone comes to our door, it really should be no different. And just to know that you don't have to sign up with them and that you can take your time with it. You can ask for an estimate, ask for a contract, ask to think about it. And if they don't want to give you any of those things, again, that may be a red flag that this is not a company you want to do business with. So with that, we're just going to have one brief slide here about the rest of our webinars coming up. We have one coming up in March for National Consumer Protection Week. We touched on some things about landlord-tenant rights and landlord responsibilities. We have that coming up in April, but always be on the lookout from us to the extent that this webinar was helpful and other things you may want to know from us.
Yeah, we've got our website up there, massago.eventbrite.com. We actually have our next webinar isn't listed there, but we have a collaboration between our human trafficking unit and our fair labor division, and they're looking into labor trafficking in Massachusetts. That's going to be happening on Wednesday, February 13th. You can sign up for that by going out to massago.eventbrite.com, or you can sign up for any of our other presentations like Tim said. We'd be more than willing to help out.
Briefly here, just some of our hotline numbers. Again, important thing to remember, everybody's going to get a copy of this presentation, so no need to furiously write them down. A lot of what we talked about, complaints about utility companies, complaints about competitive electric suppliers, landlord-tenant complaints, all of those can come through our CARD hotline, our Consumer Advocacy and Response Division, potentially filing a complaint with them. But we also wanted to highlight some of our other hotlines that we have here, fair labor, civil rights, and to know that also all of these divisions do presentations and do outreach events, and we work with them to bring some of their expertise. So to the extent you'd like to hear more from them, perhaps on a future webinar, perhaps in person, we'd be happy to set that up.
Today's webinar that we had on consumer protection geared towards winter protection, we can come and give that to your organization or community group. We can also give out a presentation that's basically the points that we gave on competitive electric supply. We actually have a bigger presentation which actually goes into the nitty-gritty details of that. We can give that to your community group or your municipality as well. So yeah, this was a quick one. We really appreciate you being a part of this. Tim and I are going to stay here for about 2 more minutes, and then we'll let everyone get out to that parade. But if you have any questions, you can use the chat function. We'll be here. Thank you for being a part of today's webinar. We always appreciate you, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you.